Hey dreamers, I'm Joe Pardo, and my guest today is making his dreams come true by helping people every single day. That is something that I absolutely love and can get behind. Dreamers, I'd like to welcome to the show Marc Miller.
Hey, Joe. It's great to be on your show.
It's great to have you, Marc. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Dreamers podcast today. How are we feeling?
Oh, this is, it's the middle of June. I'm here in beautiful Austin, Texas. It's not too hot. And
it's not the sun yet.
Well, when we hit July, we'll be hitting 100 degrees. So I'll wait for that.
I have yet to be in Austin. I've only been to Dallas-Fort Worth like two or three times, something like that.
Well, we are the little blue dot in the middle of a very red state. The city motto is "Keep Austin Weird."
I've heard that. I had dinner with some Austiners in Disney World like 2 or 3 years ago. It was by chance. We just happened to be eating at like the beer garden, and they happened to be from Austin, and they were telling us about how wildly different Austin is from the rest of Texas.
Well, the governor just was quoted as saying, "I leave Travis County and it smells differently. It's the smell of freedom." And it's like, well, Lyft and Uber got kicked out because they didn't want to play by their rules, and the state was trying to get rid of our bag ban. We do things a little differently here.
So, Marc, why don't you get started by giving some background about yourself?
Sure. I am a recovering engineer. Yes, there's a 12-step program for that. Started my career in the 70s working for IBM. I spent 22 years there wandering around. I made about 5 career changes in those 22 years. I then left after they screwed me on my pension in 2000, went to work for a successful tech startup, and by age of 46, we were debt-free, and then I had, on July 11th of 2002, I had my moment of clarity. I came down a hill on a bicycle. Yes, a bicycle, not a motorbike, at about 25 miles an hour, turned into a blind turn, and there was a Toyota Corolla going the other direction about the same speed. I totaled a Toyota Corolla with my body and my bicycle. Spent 5 days in the trauma center. I broke a hip. I dislocated a shoulder. I tore up a knee. I broke a bunch of ribs, broke the clavicle, had the imprints of the pads of the helmet in my head, but I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to. They had me walking on crutches in 3 days. I was back on a bike in 10 weeks, flying back to China in 4 months. Oh, by the way, I flew right smack into the middle of the SARS epidemic, the bird flu epidemic. And so it was I refer to as my WTF moment. Why am I doing this? I then laid myself off the next year, went off and taught high school math in an inner city high school. I had been teaching. I've taught adults for 20 plus years in 40 different countries. And there are a lot of funny stories of teaching in high school. I then I couldn't do that and stay healthy. So I went off and did a 1-year stint at the Jewish Community Center, developing a corporate development program. I commonly joke, being a non-Jew, being the face of a Jewish organization is interesting.
They didn't make you convert?
No, they actually hired me because I wasn't Jewish. So it was but I grew up in New Jersey in an entirely Jewish community. I mean, we used to get Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur off at my high school. So I joke, I relapsed. I went into another tech startup, life size, high definition video conferencing. We got bought out by Logitech. It got real ugly real fast. And that's when I formed Career Pivot, which is what I've been doing for the last 5 years, which, as I now say, I help people in the second half of life make career transitions.
Oh, I love that, because it's not always easy to find a career that's going to last as long as you do, right? I always go back to the milkman, and honestly, soon to be. I mean, heck, even Uber drivers are on notice, right? Like,
Well, it's rather interesting. As a baby boomer, I was raised to be an employee, to go work for a father-like company that would take care of me. And after 30 or 40 years, I would ride off into the sunset and retire. But three-quarters of the way through, they moved my cheese. And I wasn't raised to say work was my passion. Work was meant to pay the mortgage, put the kids through college, put food on the table. It was not supposed to be fun. Of course, Gen X, the guys between 30 and 50, they were all raised half of them grew up in single parent households, and so they said, well, when I'm successful, I'll be happy. Well, that didn't work. And then we raised all you kids, millennials, to say, follow your passion. The money will follow. Well, that didn't work either.
Oh, I would disagree with that. But only for the ones that actually want to work and like actually put the work in for what they're passionate about. It's not a cop out for sure for the people that actually make what they want into a reality. But it takes a lot of work, right? It's not it's like I'm going to be a YouTuber. Because I said I'm a YouTuber, here's my sack of money.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work that way.
It's the number of folks I've found who have anthropology degrees and art history. In fact, my son works for Navy Intelligence. His wife works for the Smithsonian, and we were up in the one of the art galleries in DC, and there's this young lady working there, and she had an art history degree. I said, wow, I bet your parents are proud. You actually have a job that has to do with art history.
Yeah, right? I mean, most of the people I grew up with aren't doing what they went to school for. And so I'm curious, do you feel that is part of that school industrial complex? Like where it's like, hey, we need to make money as a school, so let's like pump in as many as we can. And like the privatization of schools like the University of Phoenix, Art Institute of whatever.
Yep.
Insert school here.
It's a combination of problems. It's number one. I'll put it bluntly. A lot of boomers I have met. How did they get into their career? Either number one, they did what their parents told them to do, or two, it happened to be there at the time, and they just went off and did it. Today, the problem we have is there are things that people want to go do, and then there are things that society is willing to pay for. And the challenge is there has to be a balance. And the universities are saying, "Oh, you want to be an anthropologist? Sure, we'll let you shell out as much money as you want, and we will graduate." A class example here in Texas. One of the largest professional groups that has the highest unemployment rate is lawyers.
Oversaturation.
Oh, it's across the country. We have an oversaturation of lawyers because the law schools keep on pumping them out. And so, and do they want to slow down? The answer is no. And by the way, a lot of law is being automated. If you think you can, I've written a couple of blog posts. If you think your job is immune to bots and automation, you're smoking something, and yes, you are inhaling.
Not everyone would get that, but I can appreciate it. Even being a millennial, on the back end of it.
You should get the Bill Clinton.
Yeah. I mean, I was young at the time, but yeah, no, yeah. So what I always tell people is, if you're interested in doing something that's not, and it's a great point about going to law school for, it being oversaturated. There's the thing I always bring up is like, look, if you want to do something that's out there, like, well, let's say in the art field or anything that's like that, like, you need to do more than go to school for it, right? Like, by the time you get to school, if you're going to go to school at all at that point, like, you already need to be like 4, 5, 7, 8, 10 years into it, right? Like, I'm not going to wake up one morning at the age of 17 and be like, Well, I think I'm going to be a professional baseball player when I grow up. Well, I'm going to college, so let's go get that college money, or what's it called? Tuition, not tuition. I can't even think of what it's called. The grant scholarship. That's the magic word. Scholarship for baseball, because I decide I'm going to go be a professional. Like, no, you need to like already have been doing that, because you're competing against people like that. Same with like photography, or digital arts, or any of that stuff. I would say the only exception would be programming. Would be the exception. Programming language you can learn, but again, you have to actually put in the work to do it. But it's like you can't just wake up and be like, okay, I'm going to get my career in photography. It's like, great. Like, you're competing against, when you get out of college, you're competing against people who have been doing it for like 20 years already, 21 years already. Since they could hold a camera, they've been doing photography. What are you going to do to get a job against that?
Well, the reality is, particularly for folks my age, and by the way, I'm 61, is when we decide we want to do something, you're not going to go back to college. You're not going to spend that kind of money, because it'll never pay for itself. It's going back and figuring out, how can I leverage my existing expertise, my existing industry knowledge, and how can I pivot into the next profession? That's why my podcast, which is Repurpose Your Career, and my book, which is Repurpose Your Career, is learning how to either pivot your skill set or your industry knowledge and start working off into a new direction. I said I've made 7 career changes. Actually, I'm on my 7th career, so I've made 6 career changes. And I've been joked the fact that I don't know how to hold a job. But it's learning how to leverage what you currently know to move to that next step. I always claim that every one of my career changes has been a half-step career change, and that is, I had 1 foot in the old world, I had 1 foot in the new world, and there was always a relationship that took me across. In other words, I never did it alone. And for us guys, that's really hard, because I'm a guy. I don't like asking for directions, much less asking for help. It's learning the fact that you're going to have to make these changes, do it incrementally. And because most of us, when we reach this age, we have, as you're discovering, there are responsibilities. You're responsible for your kid and a mortgage and all these things that you're responsible for.
It's a lot of balls to juggle at once. I never. It's funny. I think the one of the best things I ever heard was how, the new issues and new problems that you're presented with aren't necessarily going to be solved with the old ways that you were able to solve problems. And I mean, to me, entrepreneurs are professional problem solvers. So for me, it's like, oh, I get that. And doesn't make it a lot easier, but at least I understand going in what I'm going to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, the reality is we are going through so many changes, and they're happening so fast that, we are seeing more industries and job categories destroyed. At the same time, we're having new industries and new job categories created. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at us right now. You're recording on your PC using a very inexpensive piece of software. We're talking across Skype, which is free. And 10 years ago, none of this existed. Now, podcasts were in their infancy 10 years ago, but smartphone, iTunes, all of this is brand new. And by the way, is it going to stop changing? No. If anything, we're going to see even more acceleration of change. And we will see, again, from a career perspective, more destruction, more disruption, and you just have to learn to be nimble. I call it, you don't want to be a turkey. Okay, the turkey analogy I got from Taylor Pearson, who he got it from somewhere else. He wrote the book End of Jobs, which is a turkey is born in a sterile environment. The butcher for 3 years takes very good care of the turkey. Every day for the turkey is better than the last until the fourth Thursday of November of that third year, when suddenly it's not so good to be a turkey. So you have to, I'm talking to a bunch of business analysts in August, and I use this analogy with them because business analysts tend to be very project oriented. Well, you know what? Projects come to an end. And you need to be looking for your next job before the project comes to an end.
You know, I have a question. What in your opinion, what is some of the best ways that at your, not even at your age, but even younger than you, to get motivated to make that career pivot? Because aside from like I need money or I'm going to lose my house, like how to go from that like I'm in panic mode to let's be proactive about it and do what I can do to make that jump.
Well, number one is know thyself. One of the challenges we all have is typically when we go to work, we start taking on the role. We're actors, and we take on a role, and we play that role. And what happens is we, at times, lose ourselves into the role. We don't even know that we're playing a role. So, like we discussed before the call, I'm a closet introvert. I got paid more when I worked for IBM. I was a public speaker. I was a geek that could speak, or an articulate techno weenie, which we all know is an oxymoron. And I learned to be an extremely good extrovert. I'm not an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I do not get energy from being around people. And what happens is, as we get older, we have to understand what makes us happy. What makes us fulfilled, what our true talents are. Because one of the real challenges is we get paid for our skills. Okay? Skills that are not tied to your innate talents and you overuse them is when burnout occurs. So, and by the way, many of us have those skills because why did we acquire those skills? Because our employers wanted us to. They paid us to do that stuff. And that's a challenge. And the older we get and the further we get from childhood, the less we understand what our true talents are. We forget that. And as you move along, and suddenly, in my case, most of my clients have finally gone, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. They don't know why, but they're not happy. And people around them are going, oh, but you're so good at it. Why would you want to stop? You make so much money. Why would you want to stop? Like I said, the number of miserable lawyers I've known who hate the law practice, but they keep on doing it because it makes them lots of money. And at some point, you reach a point, and so it's rather than waiting until you're miserable, is kind of starting to change that. There's a real good book out there called The 100-Year Life. Really recommend anybody pick it up. It talks about the fact that in my generation before me, we had what was traditionally known as a 3-stage life: learning, getting educated, working, and then retiring. Folks folks who are those of my age and slightly younger can experience what they call a 3.5 or 4-stage life, which is getting educated, working, and then going, crap, I need to keep working. So you have a 3.5 or 4 stage, and then finally you retire. By the way, Joe, you're going to live probably well over 100.
We'll see.
Okay?
We'll see.
The odds are you are going to have a very long. So if you think you're going to retire at 65, again, you're smoking something.
Oh, I'm not retiring.
Right? The odds are
no interest in retiring.
What's going to happen is going through these cycles of where you get educated, you work for a while, you stop, you take a break, you get re-educated and in 10 to 15 year cycles. Mm-hmm. And that will really change, because in order to live to 100, you're going to have to work till you're 85 or 90. Because there ain't going to be enough money. And so the whole concept of work will change. And that's really hard for folks my age, because we were raised to be employees. We're supposed to go work for somebody for 30 years. And by the way, that story didn't pan out. And we're still trying to learn that. And by the way, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur, particularly a tech entrepreneur. I've been through 2 successful tech startups, and the barriers of entry are so much lower.
No, I agree. I mean, hey, I got to the point where I had to leave my my career choice or decision that I did make, which is, I mean, I don't know how much you know of my story, Mark.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. So I left my family's business to do my own thing. Of course, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I figured it out, and 3 years later, here I am. We're still doing it, right? We're still rocking and rolling. Didn't lose the house or anything like that. Unlike what some people thought would happen, didn't happen.
Yep.
Didn't let it happen. But with that said, I have no interest or plans of retirement, and even if I was retired, I'd still be working. I'd still be writing books or doing DJing or something. So I have no interest in sitting still anytime soon.
Well, you have a 1-year-old. You can't even be thinking about that. By the way, in about 12 to 13 years, you're going to get really stupid.
Oh, what? Because middle-aged?
No, because your kid will become a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly, the world around you looks at you and say, God, you're stupid. Well, at least that's what your teenager will tell you. And then over the next 10 years, you'll gain your intelligence back.
Well, thanks for the heads up. I didn't even.
Well,
wasn't even getting there yet.
Yeah, it's the Mark Twain quote. It's amazing how much my parents learned from the time I was 15 to the time I was 25.
I bet. Well, because they must have forgotten everything that they knew when they were 15. So let's talk about some of the first steps you took when you decided to start Career Pivot.
Well, it's interesting. My bike accident was my real big moment of clarity. I was going, okay, I'm 46. We were debt free. My son had just graduated from high school. And I'm going, and he's out of the house. So why am I doing this? Why? Because I'd always done it. And I call moments of clarity when these big things happen. Good example, when your child was born, when parents die, when you get laid off, when you get married, suddenly when things change. And I claim we look at life through filters. And during these times, the filters come down. And we see what's really important. And so at that point, I went off to teach high school, which turned out I couldn't do that and stay healthy. I taught at inner city high school, and I was very successful, but I couldn't do it. Sorry. And one of the things I was doing, which is very typical of when folks in the second half of life suddenly say, what do I do next? The answer very often is you have to try stuff. This is no different than when you were 18 to 20, where you don't know what you don't know, and you just got to go try stuff. And, I did something that I came down with MSU syndrome, and that is make stuff up. You can take stuff and replace it with the appropriate 4-letter word. But the whole idea is I made assumptions. I said, I can go be a high school math teacher. I've taught in 40 different countries. I'm an engineer. There's a shortage of math teachers. Of course they want me. And the answer is no, they didn't. They don't want any guys over 40. We don't do what we're told. And they want nice, compliant people. So when I went through my local certification program at my local community college, the school districts wouldn't talk to any of us who were male and over 40. Nobody would talk to us. They talked to everybody else, but they wouldn't talk to us. I made stuff up. So one of the key things is learning how to deal from facts. And so as I went along, as I kind of went through these various transformations, and I got involved with a job club in 2006, which I've been on their boards and Launchpad Job Club since 2006, I watched a lot of my cohorts, baby boomers, get wiped out in these last two recessions. As it turns out, I rode out both recessions at successful tech startups. I couldn't have been luckier. And so I've watched a lot of my friends their lives have been disrupted. And I got the idea behind Career Pivot at the depth of the Great Recession because going, okay, I'm sitting here once again. And who is dealing with the boomers? And the answer was nobody was, because we were all going to go retire. And the answer is about 4 out of 5 can't afford to retire. We don't have enough money. And as we start looking at it, I said, okay, I've been in learning and development for much of my technology career. And the answer comes down to is, okay, how can I teach these people to reframe? It's reframing reality and start making decisions around who we really are, which means, by the way, going back and discovering who we are again. Because of all, I worked for 30 plus years. I've been in this role at work that I, quote, play. And unfortunately for a lot of us, that's not who we are. But we convince we are. We convince ourselves we are. And then you start saying, okay, I got to do something different. It's not unlike, they said, the problems. Well, like you talked about, you left your family business and said, what do I do now? Okay, you got to go try stuff. But it's all about mitigating the risks, right? And be able to make successful pivots in ways in which that we can maintain our income and try new stuff. Don't make stuff up. Don't make assumptions. Oh, of course they're going to want me. Well, no, they don't. And be able to essentially filter through the BS. And realizing that times people are going to tell you BS. And be able to kind of filter through that. But the big thing is you're not going to do it alone. You're going to do it. You're going to go get some help. And there are lots of different ways that can be done. So I actually launched the brand in Career Pivot in 2012. I left my last corporate gig in early 2011. And I've been building this business up for 5 years. So it's again, I'm on a marathon. I'm not on a sprint.
I think that was one of the big things that I had to realize when I started up this podcast, that it wasn't a sprint and it was definitely a marathon. And, just so you know, and everybody that's listening, it took me, I think about 4 years to figure out that I was ready to move on from the company. So it didn't happen overnight. It was very calculated, even though in the end it was like, I didn't have enough planned, like many of the baby boomers. I didn't have enough money in the bank to just retire, but as far as planning goes. So it was calculated, but it was still gutsy at the same time because I didn't have everything figured out.
Well, I once a month I interview someone who's made a late career pivot, and one of my episodes was on my buddy Vicky McCullough, who in her mid-50s got laid off for the umpteenth time. I think the fourth or fifth time in 6 or 7 years, all due to acquisitions. And she decided, I'm going to go out on my own. And she didn't wait to figure out her target market. She just says, I've done freelance marketing before. I'm going to do freelance small business marketing again. And she didn't wait to figure out her target market, which, by the way, is small service businesses. So architects, engineers, lawyers. And if you wait to figure it all out, you'll never start. So it's, in fact, I claim a lot of when we make these changes, it usually occurs in 3 different ways. One, you're pushed over a cliff and you just go, ah. The second is you look over the cliff and you go, okay, you take a step back, say your prayers and then go, Geronimo, at least you know what's going down below. Your third choice is you look over the cliff, you go back and get a parachute, and you plan it. Now, the reality is, for the 8 episodes I've done with people who have made late career pivots, the reality is none of them the reality was it didn't turn out as they expected. You have to be willing to move with the market, with what things are, where the demand is. You have to listen. And you can't be so rigid that you say, I'm going to do this, and this is the only thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to make it work. And the answer is, it's kind of like right now. I've developed curriculum in 40 different countries. And I can tell you, every time I've done something in a different country, no matter who I thought the audience is, I was never right. It's always different. And it's learning to be able to say, okay, I think it's this. I'm going to go after it. And then you're going to listen. And if you're not willing to listen, and obviously you have a successful podcast here, you're listening. Right? And it's everything from, okay, I got 1 episode, there are a ton of downloads. I got another episode. Well, geez, nobody listened to that one. Okay, you learn something. From every one of these things, you've got to be able to listen and adapt. And that's the key. If you're not willing to do that, things never are going to turn out the way you expect.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. Starting, I didn't have a podcast before I started this one. I barely even listened to podcasts before doing this, and it's incredible. What can happen when you just get started. But the thing for me was, and I think what finally did it, as far as like, okay, I've been contemplating for 4 whole years what I'm going to do. Was like, I know that if I don't push it if I don't just jump out, then it's never going to really happen. And that's what had to happen in order for me to get it rolling. But and figuring it out as I went along, as far as like what worked, what didn't work, and what to be able to do or get to where I'm at now 3 years later, I had to develop 7 different income streams to just get to the floating point of like, hey, I'm not like living month to month, and I'm not like drowning in debt, and I'm not losing the house, and like that's not like, oh, look, we're getting a new house, or hey, we're getting this, or we're getting that. Like, that was just to maintain like what I got, and that's really all I wanted out of life, is like, let's maintain what we got right now. We'll worry about tomorrow and what's to come later.
Well, you make an interesting point. One of the key, like I said, I was raised to be an employee. I was used to getting, when I worked for IBM for the longest time, I got a check every Monday morning. Every week. For years, I got a paycheck. And then suddenly you go out on your own, and it's not about the paycheck. It's about cash flow. And I joke the fact that when I left my last corporate gig, and I was in my mid to late 40s, and we had plenty of money. We were doing fine. Actually, I was in my mid 50s, but that still didn't stop me from waking up at 4 a.m. going, I don't have a paycheck. And as I said, I'm a recovering engineer. I'm very logical. And I discounted the emotions. And that you have to allow yourself to, prepare yourself. And by the way, in fact, I've been reading several things in the press here. It's one of the problems we are having in our current economy is we have very little security in our employment. And so therefore, that causes people a lot of anxiety. But in the middle class, am I going to have a job next year? And in fact, I wrote a blog post a couple of weeks ago on create opportunities and stop reacting to opportunities. Because I was raised to react. Someone's going to come along and offer you a job. If you sit, you keep your nose clean, you go work for the good employer, they're going to take care of you. Well, I wasn't raised to go create those opportunities. And unfortunately now, that's what not just millennials, everybody needs to do is go make sure and create your own opportunities. And there are two ways to look at that. Number one, you could decide, I'm going to go do something and I'm going to go create something. Or two, I am going to put myself in a position when an opportunity appears, they're going to come for me because I know all the right people. I know the company where I want to go work next, and I know all the people there. I'll use the example, my second startup. I got the job there because someone picked up the phone and called me and says, hey, we're looking for someone to build a training program. And they knew me from my first startup. They called me rather than me out there looking for the job. And it's about being proactive. It's like right now I train my clients to say, okay, you take a new job for the first 6 months, you work your butt off. At the end of 6 months, you go back and look back on that last 6 months, and you set your goals for the next 6 months, and you set those goals at 1 year. You go do the same thing, and oh, by the way, you update your resume and your LinkedIn profile. At a year and a half, you go through the same process again, except now you start working your target list again, and you start looking for your next job. And I've had people say, well, what about loyalty? And I say, screw loyalty. Companies aren't loyal to you. And it doesn't mean you're going to leave, but you're preparing to change jobs every 18 months. Doesn't mean you will, but you're going through that process.
But you're always prepared, right? And the other thing to go along with that is if you not just to be prepared because you don't know what's going to happen at the job, but it's an open market now, right? It's the job like, and I talk about this in my daily business vlog. Like these businesses are competing, with their benefits packages and everything. It's kind of come full circle because it was like, benefits were starting to go by the wayside, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's a hole that needs to be filled. So smart businesses say, okay, let's figure out how we can incorporate more benefits to entice better employees. And then we pull those people in, and it'll start to probably go back around at some point, 5, 10, 15 years where benefits will start to get chipped away. And it'll start back up again where, oh, hey, look, we got benefits. You should come work for us.
Well, the reality is, and right now what we have is largely a skills mismatch. We have still in my generation, we still have a large number of long-term unemployed. And by the way, they don't have the latest skills. And, starting in the Great Recession, employers stopped training. So the classic example is the manufacturing company wants to bring in a robot to replace 20 employees, but then they can't find the guy to service the robot. And they don't want to train that person because as soon as they train them, they'll go find another job. and it's a kind of a chicken and egg. I've been dealing with I've gotten calls from a lot of folks in their 60s, and they're going, "My company doesn't train me anymore." I said, "Right, they don't. You don't have enough career runway for them to invest in. So who's going to invest in you? You. You are responsible. You are responsible for staying up on what is the next hot skill. What do you want to do? What's going to make you happy? Where's the value coming from? And pay attention, because stuff is changing way too fast. And it's kind of like I wrote my one blog post on bots and automation. Use the example, if you go to the Washington Post and you read any of the sports stories or elections, those articles are all written by bots. Okay, so if you watched the other day the Golden State Warriors beat the Cleveland Cavaliers and winning the championship, and within 10 minutes there was an article up on the ESPN app, that was probably written by a bot. It was not written by a human. Use an example in the medical profession. With everything being digitized, you can write an app that will read x-rays and MRIs better than a physician will. We're seeing it in the retail segment, and not just in retail stores closing, but by the way, there are all those folks in the back office. Whether you work for Sears, JCPenney, Target, there was an article that I quoted that the company that owns Men's Warehouse and Joseph E. Banks, they are very likely will go bankrupt this year.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't see that.
Well, it's changing how we buy clothes. And so the entire retail segment, by the way, the fight for 15, and yes, I am for $15 minimum wage. Mm-hmm. But by the way, one of the things it's going to cause is you're going to be able to, like here locally, we got P. Terry's hamburger place. You're going to be able to order your hamburger from your smartphone. And there will be encouragement to walk up to a kiosk and eliminate humans.
Well, there are. I mean, like I go to Wawa. I mean, you're from Jersey, so yeah. I mean, Wawa, we've been ordering from on screens for like 10 years, if not more, probably longer than that. And it's wonderful. But somebody's still making the food, at least for now.
Yes.
I'm all for automation and stuff like that. I'm also for saving jobs, but sustainable jobs, right? That's the whole thing.
Well, one of the key aspects of we are going to continue to see manufacturing jobs go away. Mm-hmm. I'll use the example. I live here in Austin, Texas. We're in the oil patch. When oil prices collapsed in 2014, the number of rigs declined by about 60%. We now have the same number of rigs working here in Texas as we did prior to the collapse of the oil price. By the way, there are no new jobs. The oil companies have completely automated. They've been financially incented to automate. Mm-hmm. When oil was $110 a barrel, they could afford to throw humans out there and do a lot of work manually. They ain't doing that no more. So it's paying attention to that and going, okay, is my job vulnerable? Can my job be replaced? And just because you think you're in a high skilled job, like a X-ray technician or more importantly, a doctor, a radiologist,
even surgeons, they do it by robots.
That's right. We're going to see more and more. Well, my wife, believe it or not, she's going in for a pill cam.
Really?
Yes, she probably
awesome.
has a bleed in her intestines.
I mean, that's not awesome. That's terrible. But the idea of a pill cam is amazing.
They're going to she's going to take a pill and they're going to wrap her with a bunch of sensors, and they're going to be able to watch the thing go through her small intestines. What?
So I think the important question is to ask yourself is like when, right? Like every like probably almost every job is going to be cannibalized at some point, and hopefully we can create new jobs in the wake of. But in the meantime, but it's just like when, right? It's like the surgeons don't have to worry about it today, but do I have to worry about it in the next 10 years, 15, 25 maybe, 25, 30, 50? Like, it's just it's one of those things where it's like if you're going to school, that's, you need to be looking at when. If you're already in it, that, when is a big question too, because it's like, well, if I'm going to pivot, I need to look at it because maybe my job is only going to last another 5 or 10 years. And I go, like, I come out of the trucking industry, and I know a lot of truck drivers and stuff like that. So talking with them, I'm like, hey, this automatic driving trucks, like we're like 5 years away from that. Now, not every company is going to have it overnight, but 10 years. I mean, there's a company that's working to retrofit for like $1,200. They'll retrofit any truck with automated driving systems. Seems like the only one that's going to have a job left at that point is the mechanic until they have robots that do that too. But that's probably a little further down the road. But the actual like driving, you're talking 10 to 15 years. So if you're at the tail end of your driving career, you probably don't have to worry about it. But if you're like 30 and still a truck driver and not looking to do anything different, I would be using that runway to figure it out.
I would be looking at it every single year. We can, it used to be, well, what do you want to be doing in 5 years? You have to understand, the iPhone came out in 2007, 10 years ago.
Yep.
Right? We didn't. Admittedly, I had a CrackBerry before that.
And Palm was a thing, and this stuff existed before on iPhone, but
the iPhone changed everything, and it's like wow, and I'll use the example. Back in 2007, Cisco bought Flip. Flip was an HD. Was an HD camera. Inexpensive, right? Cisco took it. It killed that division 3 years later because they couldn't predict that far out. So it's not trying to predict 5 years out for your own career, looking at it for this year to next year to the following year, and just being vigilant. And the higher you are up in the food chain, as far as the higher and higher level skills, we a lot of times think we are not vulnerable. But you're wrong. And this goes back in the 1990s. I was dealing with the first beginning of distributed computing, which is what we have today. And what was the hot skill changed about every 2-3 years. And what would happen is folks would get really skilled up and make big bucks. I remember guys making $100 an hour being power builder programmers. And you're probably going, power builder? That was one hot skill back in the mid-90s. By the way, it wasn't a hot skill 2 years later. And you just simply can't plan. And so, it's staying on top of where things are going, and more importantly, what do you want to do? I had this interesting conversation with a guy just gotten laid off from a pharmaceutical company in IT, and he had built him up a set of websites over the last 10 years, and these were all SEO optimized, and they would garner traffic and then funnel them off to Amazon and other places for affiliate income. And he was making about $20,000, $30,000 a year, which allowed him to pay off his house early. And he's going, Mark, you could do the same thing. And started rattling off. I said, you know what? I can. I don't want to. I have no interest in building websites and getting them SEO optimized. And yes, I can do that. I have the skills to do it. No, I don't want to.
I couldn't agree more. When I left my family's business, my dad tried so hard to get. I don't know if he's probably not listening, but he tried so hard to get me to to start up like a truck parts, online truck parts website. And he's like, "Oh, you could totally do it." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good friends with a person who does that." And I'm like, all they do 90% of their time is sit in spreadsheets all day. And I was like, I'm not. I didn't leave this giant $100 million company to go sit in spreadsheets. If I wanted to sit in spreadsheets, I would have just stayed in that, because I could have did that while I was there, and no thanks.
Yeah, it's getting very aware of what motivates you, what makes you happy. I'll use the example. I claim most of us want 2 to 3 of 6 things when we go to work. We want either what makes us feel valued. One is the mission. I find people who are in the nonprofit world or the military, if the mission is right, they don't care about anything else. Then there's the bonus check. Then there is the public recognition. And the last 3 don't cost anything, which is the pat in the back from the boss, your team, or your client. Now, I can tell you my most important one is the pat in the back from my client. My worst jobs were my first job out of IBM. When I graduated and went to work for IBM, I worked on word processors. I never saw anyone use it. Barf. It was meaningless. This is pre-IBM PC. and I realized I've been the most miserable when I had no client contact. Well, okay, I know that. And if and by the way, I've done this several times where I've done things. Like I said, there I was at IBM sitting in a room with a coding pad. Barf. 20 years later, I went into IBM Global Services, the consulting arm, and I sat in a cube writing technical documentation. Barf. So I made the same mistake twice, 20 years apart, and made myself miserable. So it's getting real self-awareness when you make a change. If you are aware of what makes you happy, what makes you feel valued, what kind of boss do you want? What kind of team do you want? Believe it or not, how much activity do you want? It's a lot more important than people think. Things like decision making. Like I joke, I don't want a boss. All I want is someone to tell me to take that hill and then leave me alone. And I can tell you that because my best boss ever was Teresa when I worked in the IBM Briefing Center. She was tremendous at hiring superstars and then leaving us alone. And when we got into trouble politically, she backed us to the hilt. For me, that was a great boss. I can now tell you that because I reflected back on, wow. And some of my worst bosses were people who told me what to do. Don't do that. Of course, now I got the worst boss. Now I have the worst boss ever, me.
Yeah, I know, right? The biggest critic, then the hardest on yourself, and why aren't you working now and later and tomorrow morning?
I try and fire myself every morning. You're fired.
Well,
you can't do that.
Well, speaking about making a change, how did your family take it when you decided to make a change and work for yourself?
Well, I said I've made so many changes in the past that my wife just has learned to say, Mark, and I've made so many changes successfully that wasn't a problem. There's no question when you make these changes, yes, you need to have support. I call it building a fan club, and different people need different levels of a fan club, but you need that fan club to do nothing more than pick you up when you fall down. My first year of teaching high school math, I was teaching Algebra 1, Algebra 2. I would have not made it through my first year without my fan club. And by the way, what that was is every 3 weeks, I'd send out an email to about 100 people. And I was essentially blogging. This is, 2004. I was sending out an email, and that thing got forwarded all over the place. I bet it got forwarded 1,000 times every time. Because I end up with all these strange interactions When I left teaching, I went on a contract gig for the state, and I remember Jim Bruno walking into the office and said, "Mark, it's so great to finally meet you." And I said, "Huh?" "Oh yeah." He had worked at a textbook publisher, and my emails were going to the entire department of the math textbook publisher, which was about 100 people. What? Well, I knew their boss, and she was on my email list. So it came back to me in all kinds of strange ways. Those people gave me the gumption to get through my first year of teaching. I would not have made it without those people.
So I see here that you have an affinity. Well, I mean, not to see here, because you also told me that you have an affinity for bicycling, because you passionately ran into a car while passionately doing what you love. So I was curious, because you tell me a little bit more about like the bike, what you've done as far as biking, and like what
Sure.
what does it do for you that like other hobbies can't?
Well, cycling, number one, I'm tall and skinny. I'm 6'4" and about 180 pounds. By the way, when I was a senior in high school, I was 6'4" and 140 pounds with a huge head of red hair. So I was not a chick magnet. And cycling is actually very social. I was at that day when I had my accident, I was out with my club. And so it's a very social sport. It's made up of people of all shapes and sizes. And, I can mechanically change my bike that I can keep up with most people. I have big, huge gears on it. So I can climb hills. Or like the one time when I bought my bike after I had my bike accident, I ride all Italiano. I ride Ciotana Bianchi. And I was at my local bicycle shop, and the guy, Jeremiah, asked me, he says, "Do you want a triple?" Which is putting really big gears so you can, and I said, yes. And the guy behind me looked at me and he says, "Yeah, my girlfriend has a triple." I said, "Yeah, but I'm better looking than your girlfriend."
That's fine.
I'm sorry. I will take advantage of every mechanical possibility to make it easier. And so, but I largely got into cycling for the social aspect. Most of my friendships, it's rather interesting. One of the things you'll discover when our son left to go to college, my social life disappeared. Because our entire social life was built around his activities.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense.
Right? So it was, he played in club soccer and school soccer, he played in the band, and everything was around his. So suddenly, he went to college. By the way, I also lost track of seasons. Because I didn't know what time of year it was, because I knew by his activities. And suddenly he was gone. And it's like, okay. And that's when I got into cycling. Or right around the time that he was getting ready to leave. And so, and it's, I said, it's a sport that anybody can do at any age. And it's really gentle. I'm a former marathon runner, and I can't run anymore. But I can cycle.
Yeah, I do the halves and the fulls. You can't see it, but there's a bunch of medals like right to the right here. Like I can move my camera, even though the podcast can't see it. There's a whole bunch of mostly Disney medals, but yeah. So I know I understand. I understand where you're coming from with the social aspect of it.
I was a 49-second quarter miler in high school. I made the New Jersey State Finals in the quarter mile in 1974. But then again, I couldn't. I got to Northwestern, couldn't make the mile relay team, and so I ran marathons for a few years and found I couldn't do that and stay healthy. My body would break, and in cycling, cycling's are actually very gentle on your back and your body. If you have the right kind of bike. I have all steel Italiano bikes. They're all very, very good.
So I just want to remind everyone that they're listening to the Dreamers podcast. I'm Joe Pardo, and I'm having an amazing conversation with Marc Miller, who I hope's not running out of time.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, good, because I was running out of time, but I pushed my meeting. So we're good. We're good. Marc, what's been the biggest roadblock for you, and how did you go about overcoming it?
Oh, probably my biggest roadblock is getting used to the ebbs and flows. It's a real challenge. As I said, my first few years in this business was, the emotional piece. And then periodically you will have, 2 years ago, November, I had a 0 revenue month. And I went, and rather interesting, this year, my sales pipeline completely dried up right at the election. Normally December and January, people call me like crazy. It was crickets, total and complete crickets. Now it's coming back now, but everyone was frozen. And so it's like, okay, can I emotionally deal with it? And fortunately, I released my book in April. So what it gave me time to do was to work on the book and get all the final and all the marketing plans in place and everything else. But it's the ups and downs that are very emotional. And it's learning to stay grounded, knowing that I'm doing everything's right. Everything is going to turn out just fine. But we're going to go through some strange undulations. And you got to be prepared for that. And that's been a kind of a shock. If this had happened 3 years ago, I would have been going, oh my God, I'm going to have to shut the business down. And now I just said, okay, take a loan. Okay. I got credit lines. Okay. We're just going to wait it out. And May was good. June's looking like it's going to be a good month. And it's going to get back to normal. And the reality is I'm not totally in control. Right? Sorry. In fact, that's one of the things I have a hard time getting through to some clients is when they are looking for a job is you're not the one in control. In fact, most of my clients are what I refer to as square pegs. They don't fit traditional roles. And in fact, I was just talking to my one client in Germany this morning, who we are rebranding him into a digital transformation expert. And he's out speaking, and he's getting to talk all over Europe. Now, it's not bringing in job offers, but it's bringing in everything else, and it's just accelerated. But he doesn't see it because he's so deep in the weeds. And that's sometimes really, really hard to realize you're not in control. So as I tell my clientele, when you're not in control, do the things where you do have control. When someone doesn't call you that you were expecting them to call you, then rather than going, oh, they don't like me, they do, and make stuff up, well, go call them. Go reach out. Do the things you can do. Focus on things that you control, and the things you can control is your own actions. Rather than going, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Okay, reach out and focus on what you can do.
As I like to remind people, the hiring process is not something people wake up in the morning and like, man, I can't wait to go through that hiring process and go through all the paperwork and do all these interviews that I got to go through and all this stuff. Like even people that are in HR, they don't like it either. Like it's not a fun process, and especially if it's the business owner that's the one that's doing all that stuff, because he's doing that on top of everything else he's got or she's got going on. that it's just another thing. Like, it's more of a headache at that point. Then you're like, well, I got to do some kind of training. Maybe it's not to the level of like to make them an expert, but they got to, get in involved. Like, it's a whole big thing. And, then they say like, oh, I'll get back to you in a few days. Like, it could take a few more days because you don't know what's going on. Maybe they get sick or they, emergencies pop up at work and other things take precedent. And you're just hanging on for the ride as long as you know that they know that you're there. That's the important part.
Let me give you another way of looking at it. Hiring is like dating and marriage. Okay. I don't know who looks back on dating fondly. And
I did. I do.
I'm sorry. I was, as I said, I wasn't a chick magnet.
I wasn't either, but I definitely enjoyed it.
And so,
enjoyed it.
I joke most often when we date, we put our best foot forward and we just don't want to get rejected. And that's how a lot of times we look at, and it has to be two-way. In other words, they have to like you and you have to like them. And it's for many people, this is a painful process. And it's one of the reasons why very often people don't want to do it again. So I'll use the example back in 2006-07, I did a survey for my job club. And one of the things, and we got a good 1,000 responses. And one of the things we were discovering was semiconductor engineers were getting laid off about every 3 years. Because what had happened in the semiconductor industry, the cycles had gone from like 12, 14 years down to about 4 or 5. By the way, they're down to about 18 months now. And so what would happen is these guys and gals, but mostly guys, were getting laid off. And you tell them, I said, okay, guy, you need to be, after 18 months, you need to be looking for your next job. So who's a semiconductor engineer? They're nerds. They're geeks. They like sitting behind a screen. The last thing they want to do is go out and talk to somebody. But you're saying you need to be always looking for that next job. And that's very uncomfortable for them. And that's where the real challenge comes down to is putting yourself out there and just being aware of how can you network, how can you find that next gig. And by the way, I have a little technique on finding someone who can hire you, and that's by looking for people who look, taste, and smell like you. Looking for people in your geography who have the same skill set, have the job type you want, have your kinds of background, your education, and you start searching for them, and then you go, where are they working? Those employers are the ones capable of hiring you. Doesn't mean they have a job right now, but that's a way of building a target list, right? I'll use the example. I've got a 57-year-old client who is now remaking herself as a Ruby on Rails programmer. So what I had her do was, in her area, was do a search for Ruby on Rails programmers. And most of them, 95% of them, were young guys. But she could look at the pictures and determine who was older. It's not a scientific method. But what she soon discovered was everybody who was older was working for government agencies and government contractors. Okay, those are the places we're targeting, right? Let's go target. If she is a company where everybody on the team is 25, are they going to hire this 57-year-old woman who, by the way, is in one hell of a shape, and she's climbed Mount Ventoux on her bicycle, the Tour de France? But are they going to hire her? Probably not.
I don't know, because diversity has become a thing too. Like, as much as like, oh, out with the old, in with the new, and we, older people, they don't want to learn and all that stuff.
Yes,
I would make an argument that I think that the counter to that is the increase in diversity and the people wanting to make it more diverse. And I would think, like, if if I'm like 20, 30, because I am 30, and I'm running this like startup or whatever, and I'm looking for a Ruby on Rails person, and somebody comes to me that's 57 and is like, yeah, I want to do it, and I can do it, and I have the skill. I'm like, heck yeah, let's do it. Like,
yeah. The answer is, most of the time, the answer is no. It's like, would you hire your grandmother?
If she had the skills, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a challenge. And because we have a bigger diversity in the workforce today than we've ever had before, age-wise. And we are changing the fact that, I've been through, several tech startups, and it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. The barriers to entry have just collapsed. And so, yeah, it's a real challenge, but it's looking for, those people who look like you, and you are going to run into the least amount of discrimination by looking for people who are fair hiring. And not every company is fair hiring. And I'll use the example. I had a former client who was 66. He was unemployed for 2 years. He's now working at Dell, and he got a call on a Thursday. He got a call on a Thursday from a friend saying, "Send me your resume." He had an interview the following Monday. He had an offer the following Thursday.
Wow.
It happened that fast. And I say he was 66 at the time, and he'd been unemployed for 22 months.
Jeez.
And so the point is, that's a classic example where you're not in control.
Absolutely. Mark, I'm curious, because you haven't mentioned much about it. What was your childhood dream growing up?
My childhood dream? Wow. Probably, I wanted to be the next Wilt Chamberlain. I was very skinny growing up. I was always the tallest kid in my class. I was, 6'4" and 6'3" as an 8th grader.
Wow. Wait, how tall are you? How tall are you?
I'm 6'4".
Oh, okay.
No, wow. I was 6'3".
So you peaked at 8th grade?
Yeah, I was 6'3" and 125 pounds.
Wow.
As I said, at that point, walking and chewing gum was difficult. But yeah, it's, I grew up in the day and age. I was a big New York Knicks fan. I grew up in New Jersey. Exit 9 in the Jersey Turnpike.
I'm at 2.
I tell you, let's see, 2 means you're way south, right?
Way south. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. We're like 20 miles from the Delaware Memorial.
Okay. Yeah,
we can see Philly from down the street here.
No, I was born in Bayside, Queens, and when I was a year and a half old, we moved to East Brunswick, New Jersey. And I left it after I graduated in 1974 and never to return. Well, I came back for summers, but that's about it. And my brother is still there. He still lives up around Wayne.
Oh, okay. So since you're not Wilt Chamberlain, my question is why did you want to be in basketball? If you weren't involved in sports, it sounds like.
Oh, I was involved in sports. I was, as I said, in starting in about middle school, I got into track. I was an award-winning quarter miler all the way through high school and through middle school.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I forgot. Sorry.
I was fast. I was not coordinated. I was fast, but I loved to compete. And it's like anything else. It's, at one of the things is what we want to do as kids. So for example, one of the things when I take people to figure out what their talents are is going back to their childhood and what did they do they couldn't get enough of. In my case, it was doing jigsaw puzzles. I didn't do them a lot, but when I did, they were completely addictive. Now, by the way, I spent a lot of my technological career in networking, which is nothing more than pattern matching, which is what jigsaw puzzles are. Now, by the way, that comes into what I do today is I can look at I use a very complex assessment called the Berkman Assessment. And other career professionals don't like it because it's so complex. I'm sorry. I see patterns. I joke. I see dead people. I can read through that stuff. When I sit and listen to, I put my clients through branding sessions, and I have them just sit and listen and tell me your story. I can pick out a pattern that no one else will see. Or more importantly, you won't see. And that's my talent. Now, one of the things I've learned to do is build skills on that. So, classic example I use for talents and skills is Larry Bird. Larry Bird was quoted as a winner is someone who understands what their God-given talents are, works like hell, develops skills that turns them into an expert and into a winner. Something like that. And I claim, if you remember, Larry Bird was not a great athlete. He was slow. He couldn't run. He couldn't jump. I claim his innate talents were great vision and great hand dexterity, which he then turned himself into a great shooter and passer. In other words, he worked his butt off to take those talents and turn them into something else. And the challenge is we often forget what our talents are.
Well, because we're too close to the situation to see it. And a lot of times, it's easy to be too close to a situation to see all that. And that's why it helps to have people on the outside in that fan club to tell you, like, hey, this is what you're really good at. Sometimes it's hard to hear that, especially if it's from your mom or your dad, right? Like you're always, or at least I am always like quicker to take a compliment from somebody I have no interest in, like have no invested interest in, because there's no reason to be nice unless you really want to be nice.
Yes.
So for me, it can be difficult, but yeah, no, I think that's really awesome that you took that skill. I mean, obviously, working at IBM, you got to be a smart cookie because they are some of the smartest cookies, and they only want to be surrounded by other smart cookies. So the lesson is be a cookie and be sweet and smart and. So, Mark, I'm curious, with all that said, what do your dreams for the future look like going forward?
Well, I joke the fact that I know I like helping people. I also know that I don't want to, I've been through 2 successful tech startups. I don't ever want to work that hard again. And 2, I want control. So my goal is to never retire, is to work less at something I love. And that's what I'm doing. I want the control to work how much I want to work. And oh, by the way, where I want to work. We've been experimenting. We just came back from Ecuador. We're looking at either moving to Mexico, Ecuador, Panama, and be able to control. And I want control over what I do. And I want to be able to do it from anywhere. It's that simple. Because I'm never going to retire. I'm not going to retire like my parents did. And not that I can't, I don't want to.
No, I totally identify with that. And obviously, if you're willing to move to Ecuador or one of those other cities, countries. Sorry,
in South America.
Yeah, in South America in general. I mean, it's going to be a lot cheaper for you to live there. So, retirement is probably much more more plausible than living in the States at that point if you wanted it. But it's amazing and awesome, and I congratulate you for making that choice to say, no, I'm cool with working. Like, I just want to do what I want to do, though, on my terms.
That's right.
To have that vision.
And be able to step back and say, okay, I don't want to work for the man anymore.
Yeah, you worked for the man on the block for many years at IBM. So
it's interesting. Three of my last 4 jobs, my biggest problem was with my boss. And particularly my last boss was an unethical SOB. I was told to go hire the CEO's brother in the middle of the recession who was unqualified. And I said no. And he was told, I don't have a choice. I said, yes, I do. I gave him the single finger salute, and I timed it to the day when I resigned. I got the biggest financial reward. I timed it right to when the next stock option vested, when I got my bonus. I timed it to the day. One of the key things is no one can make you do anything. You always have choices. And understanding that you always have choices. And I had a choice. I could do what he wanted me to do, or the choice was I wasn't willing to cross, and I wrote a blog post on this. I didn't want to cross those ethical boundaries. And I had a lot of people saying, well, why are you so upset about it? It's unethical. It's nepotism. We're at that point, we're a public company. You can't, it may be legal. It's not right.
Well, one of the life-changing concepts in my first book is keep your options open, and always know that there's more options than what you probably are seeing at the moment, because there's always a way. So you just got to keep digging to find it. Marc, before we wrap up and I ask you for what some final thoughts that you have, how can people connect with you and get your book and reach out?
Sure. You can reach me. Go to careerpivot.com, and you will find on the right column my latest book, which is Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life. And that's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other fine online retailers. You will also find Personal Branding for Baby Boomers on Amazon and all the other appropriate places. And I encourage everyone to listen to my podcast, which is Repurpose Your Career. And you can reach me at Marc, it's M-A-R-C, my mama knew how to spell, at careerpivot.com. and oh, by the way, on my website at the top, there's a phone number. You can call me. Now, usually it's my Google Voice number. Usually it goes to voicemail, and just simply leave a message and leave me with an email address, and we'll arrange a time to talk.
Well, I love that you have a phone number on top. I got my phone number on the top, but it's my actual phone number, not my Google Voice number, which I do have a Google Voice number, which might want to change, but whatever. It hasn't hurt. It hasn't hurt me yet. I haven't hit a brick wall yet, or I haven't hit the proverbial Toyota Camry yet. Or is it Camry? Was it a Camry?
No, Corolla. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Marc, it's been such a pleasure. Is there any last thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up?
The thing is, when you're ready to make a change, it's know thyself. Don't make an assumption. Don't make assumptions. i.e. MSU, and 3, you're not going to do it alone.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Marc, for taking the time today to come on the Dreamers podcast. It's been absolutely fun. I'm so glad that you reached out to come on, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
I always like talking to people.
And if you've enjoyed this interview with Marc Miller, please, you don't need to leave a review. You don't need to leave a comment. You can rate it on iTunes or whatever, but just tell somebody. Just tell somebody else. That's all that I ask, right? Share the love with somebody that you know that could get more out of the Dreamers podcast, and I'd really would appreciate it. So again, I'd like to thank Marc Miller for taking the time today to be on the Dreamers podcast. And I will see you all next week. And Marc, I'd love to have you on again in like a year to follow up.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dreamers Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Dreamers Podcast. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Dreamers Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Dreamers Podcast, please send an email to j@jpar.co. This podcast is copyright 2014 by jpar.co.